Hello, everybody. Today's guest is Steve Cochrane, President and CEO of Lithium Chile. I am excited to have Steve on to learn more about the lithium industry, as well as the opportunity that investors have within this. Steve, welcome to the channel.
Great, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. One thing that I caution people right now, when they bring up a chart of lithium, to be very careful because it might break the top of their computer screen. It's been going completely vertical in 2021. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe it was the top performing metal, beating out, I think it was magnesium, cobalt, et cetera, around 500% in year 2021.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's still on the same trajectory, right? I think the magnesium was number two at 300%, but it was not only the strongest performing metal, it's been the best performing commodity of any. You know, you take your grains and your oils and your gases. No, number one has been lithium for the last 12 months.
So how big is this lithium revolution in terms of future demand? So is the rising cost of lithium, does it have to do with the EV revolution taking place right now?
Absolutely. There's a huge shortfall right now between the demand and supply. There's a lot of lithium in the world, but getting it into production and bringing it on in a sustainable, environmentally friendly way is a challenge. So I saw a chart a few years back where there was supposed to be, I think there was 2013, 2014, there was 175,000 metric tons of lithium, but by 2018, the forecast was for 600,000. Well, 2017 came around, there was only 275,000. So even then there was a 400,000 metric ton shortfall from forecasts. And that's when the last rally began. If you remember 2017, 18, lithium spiked to about 23,000, 24,000 US per metric ton. Thanks to Tesla. Tesla really was starting to gain some traction, as you recall, in 2016 and 17. And then, unfortunately, a lot of the anticipated demand at that point didn't materialize. So you had a collapse in prices during 2018, 2000, and really fall of 2020, prices averaged about 5,000 US per metric ton. So a lot of anticipated new production, a lot of projects fell off the table, right? It just didn't make any sense. There were a number of the higher cost Australian lithium producers that went bankrupt, right? So all of a sudden you had the shortfall of supply. And then lo and behold, late 2020 and certainly through 2021, the pickup in EV production and demand has outstripped all forecasts. A lot of this, of course, has been driven by Asia. Chinese have to, if you've ever been to Beijing, you know how tough it could be there. They've really been early adopters of electric mobility. But so have now the US producers, right? And the US consumers. We know Tesla's there, but somebody pointed out every automotive commercial this year at the Super Bowl was an EV, electric vehicle, right? And so I think there's this real shift in perception and public acceptance of electric vehicles. And that may have been predicated by the terrible summer we had last year, with the fires and droughts. And climate change now is becoming real for a lot of people. And switching from internal combustion engine to electric vehicle is a way people can contribute to that change, right? Or contribute to not needing to change. So those are some of the underlying factors that have driven the demand side, and supply hasn't caught up, nor is it forecast to catch up until at least 2025, 2026, 2027, just because of the length of time it really takes to bring new production on.
Interesting. Has the US moved aggressively into this space already? And if so, what have they been doing? And if not, can you kind of give insight into that?
Again, and I think it was because, the adoption of electric transportation in the United States has been slow. Notwithstanding Tesla really revolutionized the whole space, the uptake has been slow. And that could be said for US lithium production as well. They have been really late to the game. They've focused on sort of old technologies, the mining, the hard rock. And it's interesting now, there's been a lot of hue and cry that, the aggressive countries, for example, China, have been going out and snapping up everything. I mean, for them, they produce over 70% of the world's batteries. So long-term security of supply has been huge for them. So they've been aggressive, and they've gone out and particularly in South America, they've bought 4 or 5 companies over the last year, pre-production companies as well, just companies with a resource, no production yet. And so now all of a sudden, there's a bit of a hue and cry, say, well, this isn't right. Don't, it's the old story, don't talk the talk, go out there and walk the walk. I think American companies are going to get a lot more aggressive in the next 12 to 24 months in acquiring these lithium assets as well, because they see it as a strategic material. They've been a little bit slow to the party, but once they get going, the Americans, American companies can make acquisitions all day long, right? So I'm hopeful that they've seen the need now, and now they need to see the opportunities that are out there. And I think South America, because of the relationship with the U.S. and North America, is going to be a prime target.
So it's clear that lithium is very important to China, and it seems that the U.S. will be potentially moving much more aggressively into it. Are there any alternatives other than lithium?
Thankfully, no.
Okay.
Not at this point in time. Lithium is the 3rd lightest element on Earth, right? And it has the highest energy density by weight. So when you need a very powerful but lightweight battery, lithium's your only choice. If weight is not a concern, if you need, if your tractor needs a battery or your car needs a battery, lead zinc is fine. But for mobile devices, phones, laptops, and of course electric vehicles, high energy storage, low weight is a major requirement, and lithium is the only element that can fulfill both those needs. So really, for the foreseeable future, lithium is your only choice, right? Maybe one day we'll have the small nuclear power plants in the back of our cars or something of that nature, but for the time being, no, lithium's your only choice.
And when it comes to mining lithium or bringing it out of the ground, I've heard of something called a lithium triangle. Can you kind of explain what that is?
Well, it's been referred to sometimes as the Saudi Arabia of lithium, because over 70% of the known lithium reserves reside in 3 South American countries, Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. And not only do they have over 70% of the known reserves, but they are the lowest cost producers of a ton of lithium carbonate anywhere in the world. So when you combine the low cost, over half the world's reserves, you can see why the comparison to Saudi Arabia would be made. So those 3 countries, Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia, the only 2 countries that are really proactive right now in developing their lithium resources are Argentina and Chile. Bolivia has political issues, right? The government there, very socialist. They really have been reluctant to bring other parties into development. So Bolivia at this point in time is well behind the curve in terms of their lithium production. So you really have to look at Argentina and Chile. And Lithium Chile is one of the few companies out there that have properties in both countries. We have a resource now in Argentina through a production well we drilled last fall. Came in with a initial resource of 1.4 million metric tons, which is great, because now we've de-risked the story. We now have an asset, we have a resource, and we also have 12 great exploration properties in Chile, any one of which could come in and be a company maker on its own. So well positioned, we're politically diversified, we're geographically diversified, but yet we're still in the heart of the lithium triangle.
That's awesome. Can you tell us more about Lithium Chile and just the sector that you're kind of leading as of right now? Maybe we can start off with, for the people that are listening, the different types of ways and various avenues that you can invest into lithium. I know that, there's exploration companies, there's resources, production, et cetera. Maybe if you can give us some insight into that and then tell us more about Lithium Chile.
Absolutely, and that's a great question, because your risk, the highest risk obviously is the exploration companies, and then once you become a resource, you've identified discovery resource, you reduce that risk, and then when you become producing, well then you're basically full blown cash flow earning company. On the production side, there's only 4 or 5 companies in the world that are there. There's Albemarle, SQM, Livent, which is the FMC, Greenbriers in Australia, a couple Chinese companies, Ganfeng, Tianqi. So the universe of actually producing lithium companies is very small. And what's happened is a lot of these companies have been swallowing up other producing companies as well. So that universe continues to shrink. Then you drop down to the companies that have made a discovery, are in the process of proving it up, expanding that resource, and that's where Lithium Chile is. We now have a resource in Argentina. We have 1.4 million metric tons on our first well. We've got 3 more planned. Our engineering consultant, our qualified person that gave us the compliant technical report showing we have 1.4 million. He thinks we could prove up another 3 to 4 million metric tons with this 3-well program. So we would take our resource from 1.5, we hope somewhere between 4.5 and 6 million metric tons. That would make us one of the bigger players in our space. Other companies that were a couple years ahead of us and had proven up 4 million and 5 million metric tons, they've all been bought out. In the last year, there's been 4 major deals done in Argentina. Millennial, which is another Canadian company, which was 35 kilometers from us, they got taken out for 500 million cash. Neolithium, another Canadian company, a little further south of us, but in that 6 million metric tons, they were taken out for $1 billion US. Both these companies were pre-production. All they had an asset in the ground. They were both bought by Chinese companies. Again, showing that concern about security of supply. So it's left a bit of a vacuum in our space, right? There's very few companies now that we've got a lot of exploration companies, but now because of the recent mergers and acquisitions, there's a vacuum a bit in our space. We think we're in a good position to fill in there, prove that we can be one of these big players. And obviously, for me, my exit strategy would be to find a buyer.
To find a buyer would be your exit strategy?
Absolutely. I think we've already had a strategic investment in our company. In the last 30 days, the second largest lithium processor in China made a strategic investment. They own about 3% of us right now. They'd like to own more, but in my mind, coming in at this stage shows a lot of faith and obviously a lot of expectation in not only who we are today, but hopefully where we're going to be at the end of the year.
Was that that you just mentioned? Was that your largest shareholder? The company?
No, management and the insiders probably own collectively about 40% of the company.
Okay.
We've had a lot of institutional support out of London, England. There were a group of institutions that back in, believe it or not, in April, May, June of 2020, saw that the lithium trade had turned, and they've been great supporters of us all the way along. Certainly at this point in time, this group is the largest shareholder we have out of China, though, and being the second largest lithium processor, soon to be the largest, it only makes sense for them to make sure they have this long-term supply, right?
Have you built any relationships with the direct lithium extraction players?
Absolutely, and we had an hour joint presentation to a group of institutions this morning. We have a great relationship with Summit Nanotech. It was the one DLE, direct lithium extraction company based here in Calgary as well, that Bloomberg said checked all the boxes. Amanda's done a brilliant job in putting together a technology that we think will revolutionize the whole lithium extraction production business. She's got her pilot unit on its way to Chile as we speak. And the plans are, once it's arrived and set up, we're going to take the brine from our Argentinian play. It's about a 5-hour drive to where her plant's going to be. And she will run a pilot program on our brines to prove it can be economic, it can be commercial, and that would be a great first step for us as well.
Awesome. Well, I don't want to keep you here much longer, but I got a couple more questions. Are there any immediate term catalysts here in 2022 that you're looking out for?
Well, probably the biggest catalyst has been the price move, right? I mean, and it doesn't show any signs of letting up. And yet over the last sort of 30 days, the lithium price is up 30%, and yet the lithium sector is down 40%, right? So there's a bit of a disconnect between the commodity itself. Typically, your industry will track your commodity. Recently, we've had a pullback and a consolidation in the lithium companies, including ourselves. So just that alone, I think that's going to blow over. It's going to be some catch up. If you're looking at an entry point, now's great because your commodity's high, your sector valuations are low. So that's a real near-term catalyst. I think you're going to see our strategic partners step up with a much bigger investment before the end of the year. I think that would be a huge message, to investors and to the market that, we're the real deal. And of course, probably the biggest catalyst we have is that 3-well program, expanding that resource in Argentina is already underway. We filed our environmental impact statement, which is the first step to getting drill permits. That was filed last week. And we expect to be drilling first well sometime, the earliest maybe mid-April, the latest mid-May. So we have a resource development program that's about to get underway, and that could be huge for not only us, but for our investors as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Last question would be just how would you compare your valuation in the market relative to the industry as a whole?
Well, I want to say cheap, but that's not probably the correct term. We're the least expensive of our peer group, right? I think when you actually take what we have now and the potential for what we have and look at all the other players, we probably are one of the better valued companies in our peer group. And I think doing what we're doing today, what I intend to do for the next couple of weeks, get this story out, that will change. People will start to see the value we see in this company. And we have one research analyst that just on the strength of that first well has a $1.53 target on us. So we have some good upside here in the near term.
Thank you so much for coming on and educating our audience.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so. And that's my goal this year, is to make as many lithium fans out there as I possibly can.
Really appreciate that.